we'd been chatting a little bit, and I was looking for an opportunity to have you on. This ongoing horror is basically, I think, all I think about, and probably a little bit all you think about as well.
Exactly the same. Exactly the same. I mean, you know what is interesting, isn't it? I think both of us are not naive. We understand in terms of the dynamics of, I guess, Western states, the Western media. I still can't get over the shock, every day. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? It's just the scale of the horror, the level of complicity, the level of deceit, the level of moral disgrace. It's odd. It's like, we know the context, like we know why, like what's happening, why the media would behave in this way. That's why we do our own media stuff, isn't it? But it's still, I can't get over the shock. Every day it hits me, and I keep talking to, I interviewed this, young lad, Khalil, Palestinian Christian from Gaza. His father died of a heart attack during the siege of the church by the Israeli forces and couldn't get medical care, so that's why he died. And he was getting his family out, managed to raise the funds to get his family out, and he had his 18-year-old sister, and 2 days ago she's dead. And you just read it, and it's just things like that. Just the horror just hits you over and over again, doesn't it?
Yeah,
well,
it does.
Can't let them get away with it. So
I know, but the thing that I think maybe you're experiencing as well is I feel a lot of rage about the narcissism of so many Westerners who live in absolute comfort and have decided that it is the most important story in the world to talk about the feelings of Zionists and how they're unsafe, how they feel like they are under attack. And it's just this incredible disconnect where you see how walled off they are from their humanity and how insular their world is, that I just fundamentally cannot understand. And that's the thing that lately has been getting me all fired up.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I did a really interesting interview. So I was writing my own reviews. I mean, she was the interesting interviewee. Nara Milanich, who's a professor at Columbia University, and she's Jewish. And she was talking to the point you were making there, actually. What I was quite interested, see, very sweet, my cat, but not when he does this.
I like the soundtrack, yeah.
It's 5 a.m, not so good. What she was talking about, because I was quite interested, actually, in talking about, on the one hand, she was talking about, obviously, the weaponization of anti-Semitism, and she was talking about that. The fact that anti-Semitism is real, it exists, and across the world, it's rising in various forms. Often, actually, if you look at the likes of the Orban regime in Hungary, the overlap between anti-Semitism and pro-Israel is quite interesting in of itself. But what I was interested in is when you get, for example, Jewish students talking about a sense of feeling unsafe, and that's actually, I used to date this guy, Brazilian Jewish guy. He grew up in a very pro-Israel, might have to get rid of him, pro-Israel family. And he said he first went to university and he was first exposed to pro-Palestinian sentiments. And he said he got a fight or flight response. He felt actual genuine fear, and his heart started beating faster. And he put that to me because now he has the same view on Palestine as you or I. He put it to me as just that was a real emotion. And what Nara Milanich put to me, because I tried putting this kind of what we do, how you navigate that. And she was talking about, how you distinguish between real, discomfort and actual harm, and the way that conversation's been weaponized. But the broader point you're making is, I just think we need to be very clear about what's happening here, which is this is one of the great crimes of our age. I mean, what we're watching is a genocidal mania, genocidal frenzy, some of the worst crimes being committed on a daily basis of our time. And those who supported this are morally disgraced, and they've lost public opinion on both sides of the Atlantic. And actually, to be honest, in Britain, it's quite interesting. A poll in mid-October, now we're talking the 19th of October, showed over 50% supported an immediate ceasefire. Another 16% said they probably supported an immediate ceasefire. And just 3% said they definitely oppose an immediate ceasefire, which is the same number who think the earth is flat. So actually in Britain already, they started from a low base. In the United States, you can obviously speak speak more about this, but any critique of Israel has been far more verboten and just outside of what is seen as you're allowed to talk about. And the fact now that more Americans than not, according to the polling, think genocide is being committed, that a large majority now over those who don't oppose Israel's onslaught. So they've lost that. They've lost public opinion. They know it's only heading in that one direction. They know it has consequences in terms of what that means for arming Israel, in terms of diplomatic support for Israel. And they also know that their own position is under their legitimacy is in collapse. So they've tried to start a moral panic and redirect the real extremists, the real dangerous people, the ones protesting the genocide. And, that's their strategy. It's gonna pan out badly for them, because now what the world is seeing, on the one hand, are grave crimes being committed against the Palestinian people, both the violent onslaught, the famine that's been deliberately created, the genocidal statements made by Israeli leaders, officials, and other prominent figures in society. And now they're seeing people being beaten up, including middle-aged female academics who are saying, trying to intervene when students are being roughed off, themselves being brutally arrested. And they're looking at that, and it's having a transformative impact on how people see the world. People have seen too much. They can't unsee it. And it's not just the people who suffer the injustices, the people who are being arrested, who are going to remember that as a formative experience for the rest of their life, a searing sense of injustice that will never go away. The people watching it, because that phrase we always said, the whole world is watching. But that's a traditional kind of placard of protesters. That's never been more true. And I just think it's what they've done in terms of the protesters is in a desperate attempt to shift kind of scrutiny onto the people opposing genocide rather than supporting genocide. But it is backfiring. It's just politicizing more and more people. And I think that's really interesting myself.
I think it's really interesting, too, how it affects the future politics of this entire generation of basically anybody under 35, in part because in the United States, at least, it's a Democrat who is enabling this and helping, as president, helping Israel commit this genocide. It's got to be radicalizing in a way that I don't think we'll fully know the implications of. What I'm seeing with these demonstrators, too, is how they've basically taken so much of what they learned from George Floyd and 2020 and the Black Lives Matter protests there about intersectionality, about solidarity, and about, honestly, tactics. They're improving on this as well. I saw The Atlantic, or I think some other magazine, that was very upset that these movements had a spokesperson. And it's like, well, we're not going to do what happened in Occupy, where these reporters would go around and Fox News try to find somebody who they could have a soundbite of. We're going to be militant and organized in our opposition to this. Like, this is an education on fascism. The police crackdown on these protests, as the people who are supporting the crackdown claim victimization, I think says everything people need to know about how close, honestly, liberalism can come to fascism under this kind of pressure cooker.
Yeah, I mean, we see throughout history. I mean, look, I mean, if we're talking about the actual rise of fascism, it was actually always preceded with liberal democracies becoming more and more authoritarian. It wasn't just like so-called liberal democracy with all its limitations and fascism the next day. Yeah. And, it's interesting if you look at Germany at the moment, where you have a nominally, supposedly, when people say centre-left, what does it really mean? But, the Social Democrats and the Greens, supposedly left of centre parties, also they're in coalition with the right of centre Free Democrats, but nonetheless, and they're launching this clamp down on protesters and anyone who speaks out. They're disproportionately targeting Jewish people. One piece of research suggested that about a third of those being deplatformed and arrested are Jewish. It's included actually many German Israelis. I interviewed a Jewish protester who was arrested there at the Palestine Congress that took place in Berlin, which was shut down by the police. And one of the German police officers was pointing at his kippah, his skull cap, and laughing. And he said you're being anti-Semitic. And then the police officer arrested him for offence to a police officer. And then those people were defiled as anti-Semites afterwards. What I just think is interesting about that, and the reason I raise that, is in Germany at the moment, the AfD, the far right, are on the rise. They're on the march, partly because of the failures of this so-called centre-left government to address huge problems in German society. And so you have this crazed moment where there's this idea of the racists of the left, because they're people speaking out against Israel's genocidal onslaught against Gaza, including Jewish people who have been defiled as anti-Semites. So you've got Yuval Abraham, who's an Israeli journalist who stood on stage at the Berlin and denounced the occupation, and then the non-Jewish mayor of Berlin denounced him as an anti-Semite. The world turned on its head. And at the same time, you have actual racists with the AfD, who, by the way, have actual proper anti-Semites in them, on the march, being legitimized by a government which keeps demonizing minorities, not least Muslims, and using the question of Israel, incidentally, to demonize German Muslims, to make them kind of this idea of, often Muslim opposition to what's happening means they're anti-Semitic. So you can see in Germany, this is happening. This authoritarianism is happening under supposedly this social democratic-led government, when the far right are on the rise. And what they're doing is paving the way for something far worse, because what happens when they fall, you'll get maybe you could end up with a right-wing government, maybe supported by the AfD, and they will use the foundations laid by this to launch a far more aggressive assault on democratic rights and freedom. So Germany is a really striking example of where all of this could lead. And liberals are, the handmaidens of this. You can see that directly in Germany, in the way that liberals have built an environment where they've helped, drive the idea of the real dangerous extremists, those protesting against this. And then that has consequences, and the consequences include these terrible, brutal crackdowns, which I think could foreshadow something far worse. I think you're absolutely right.